Yesterday I got this hankering to go camping, but as it often happens, by the time I'd gotten my stuff together and researched a few possibilities, hovering over the book it button for a care share to get past the suburbs, it was too late in the day. Siesta time, in fact. I kind of figured that I lost my chance, but then around 5:30 I got a second wind of yearning for it. I was now determined to try and find something risky that I'd long fantasized about. Like many others, I'd heard about a little fun fad called stealth camping. It didn't involve the wild side of camping like boondocking or any of those other traditional forms of camping. Stealth camping allows a person in almost any community to get outside and just spend an evening underneath the stars, even if you're just tucked away behind Home Depot or between two gas stations. You just need to be hidden away from the public world. It was time to test the waters and see if I had what it took to stealth camp. I hopped on my bike and headed for Forest Park. I was on the hunt for a pair of trees and hang out for the night. No trace when I would leave at dawn. I rode along Highway 30 for almost as far as the St. John's Bridge, then tucked into the woods west. I kept pushing a ways along an overgrown fire road, where the brambles and nettles grew way too thick. I pushed the bike aside and locked it to a small tree out of sight, marking my GPS coordinates. I felt pretty good and I'd made a lot of preparations. Nothing had gotten me snagged yet. There can be a lot of anxiety when planning trips like this, especially for me, so I was expecting any manner of things just to go wrong. Getting as far as I had without any hiccups, I couldn't help but feel at peace, relaxed, ready to proceed with the rest of my mission. With bags slung on back, I continued maybe a quarter of a mile bushwhacking, scrambling up loose slopes, until the noise below of trucks and Harleys was drowned out by the bird song and wind through the trees. I know it kind of sounds like I'm in the middle of nowhere, but Forest Park is a national park, open to the public, lots of through traffic and framing neighborhoods, and pop-up motorhome parks tucked in all over. It's a woodland, but it's pretty heavily populated throughout the right seasons. I happened upon what I took to be deer trace through the brush, deer prints even, but also boot prints. Didn't seem too fresh, maybe from before the last rains. I nearly stumbled over a mound of dozen pairs of rotting shoes and other clothing, green and black and all collapsing. Super weird, but I guess not the strangest thing I'd found in the middle of the park. Like I said, being open 24 hours, all manner of riffraff found its way through these trees. Onward. None of this concerned me. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was looking for solitude. Investigating a pile of discarded clothing and following faded boot prints seemed like a great way to end up face to face with somebody that I really didn't want to meet. Finally, maybe half a mile from the road and far from the closest trail, two trees nicely spaced, with Mount Hood framed gloriously in a red-orange sunset near an opening in the canopy. I called it perfect. I strung up my hammock. It took a bit to get the angle right though, and I needed to remake my Amsteel utility constructor ropes. They slip under the load and I'm not really sure why. I have to tie knots to prevent the slippage, making adjustments to the straps very slowly. 8-year-old Boy Scouts have a broader knot repertoire than I do, especially when being assaulted by mosquitoes and failing light. After what seemed like forever, I zipped up the bug net with complete relief, finally being able to recline in the woods. Then, moments later, I finally relaxed, surrounded in peace. Only, I'd say about 3 times in 30 minutes, I heard what sounded like snapping sticks, or just an unusual short animal vocalization. Maybe those sticks were falling from trees, or maybe it was just deer. Yeah, I was trying to keep cool, explaining away any doubt or concern that would encroach into my mind. Just as I was getting to relax again, I heard the last thing I wanted to hear. "Hey, why are you here?" Convulsed upright in the hammock immediately, dropping my phone. He approached me in the dusky light, within maybe 3 feet. Long hair, tall, bearded. Demeanor wasn't threatening, but definitely not shy. He was dirty, had obviously been out here for a long time. I just sat there and stared him down, wondering how this was gonna go. Sorry, I didn't know anybody was nearby me. You're in my path, my camp is right up here. When are you leaving? He threw a thumb up over his shoulder as he spoke to me. I planned on going at dawn. I mean, no trouble, dude. My name is Todd, I offered, speaking in the same manner that he did. I thought maybe if I matched his energy, he might act a little crazy and just move on. What's your name? I'm not believing anything you say. How did you breach the barrier? Cubic boron nitrate. The mountain is a sphere of cubic boron nitrate. It's an impenetrable barrier. I don't believe anything you say, he rambled on. Okay, confirmed crazy here. I don't have to believe anything you say, and if you force me, I'll kill you. I'll kill you right there in your hammock. Holy shit, okay, not good. I shuffled around in my hammock, trying to get into some form of a better position, but it was no use. I hung there, suspended in air, totally helpless to this stranger's bullshit. Look, I don't want any trouble, man, all right? I'm just hiding out here just like you. I don't believe you or anything you say. I know my rights, and one of them is self-protection. Do you understand? I just nodded. With that, he ducked under my suspension and trudged away up slope. Good night, I called after him, and he said nothing more, didn't even look back, which I thought was kind of weird and especially rude, considering he just threatened to kill me. He disappeared off in the darkness, and I wondered how far away his camp was from mine. Not like it mattered though, I guess. Stone cold batshit for sure. Less than 10 minutes later, I was consulting my phone for the coordinates of my bike in the dark, all packed up. I got an idea of where my bike was, orient myself, and start trudging back towards the slope. As I'm moving with the flashlight, I hear something behind me. I turn and don't see anything. Don't you take anything! The mountain must stay whole for the shield to work, the guy hollered down at me. I tried to shout something back, and instead I got hit in the head with something. God damn, did it hurt. I got my light on it and saw that it was just a random jagged piece of metal. As I was looking down, another one clocked me right in the top of my head. Had me seeing stars. The mountain is mine! I am the mountain! Fuck you! That actually shut him up. I turned back and tore through the trees, desperate for my bike. I slipped the lock off and secured my gear, blasted down the trail like I'd never had before. The guy didn't give me any chase, but I could feel the warm trickle of blood running down my scalp. Definitely not a good feeling, but still, I was safe and on the move away from that crazy asshole. I hit the road by brilliant dynamo light, seemingly so much brighter than the overall lit city. Back home an hour later or so, snuggled up to my cat. Overall, for obvious reasons, one of the worst attempts at stealth camping I've ever had. But I guess doing things like that come with a certain amount of risk. When I was just 17 and a young idiot, 3 friends and I rode from Boston to LA. We left on Labor Day and ended up in the Southwest in the fall, and most of the tourist stuff was closed down for the season. We weren't really following any established routes, just more winging it with AAA maps that we'd buy every time we crossed a state line. Generally, we'd figure out a town to go to for the night, and then the morning of, then ride out at our own pace and meet up at a destination, then figure out where to stealth camp that night. So on this day, we woke up and looked at the map, decided to meet at a town whose name I don't exactly remember. It's about 60 miles from where we camped the previous night. There wasn't much going along the way, so we were hoping there'd be a restaurant or at least some kind of convenience store when we got there. This is one of the many things that people gamble on when stealth camping. Almost everything is a coin flip. Will there even be a gas station? Will someone find me? Will I get arrested? Will somebody steal all my shit? The ride itself goes by pretty uneventfully. We meet each other at a town and then realized it's completely deserted. Literally nothing was open. We didn't even see any people. Most things were boarded up. It seemed like to us the entire town was abandoned. We rode around looking for a place to sleep. We found what looked like an entirely abandoned bar, and for some reason it just seemed like a great idea to move our bikes inside and sleep there. We didn't imagine anybody would notice or care since, as I said before, it seemed like there was exactly 0 people within 100 miles of us. Tumbleweeds, yes. Coyotes, most likely. People, nah. We were also a little demoralized since we were going to be once again eating ramen noodles and nothing else. There was no stores, nothing else to eat, nothing else to get. We start moving our bikes inside, and as we're doing that, we hear "Can I help you boys?" in a very deep voice behind us. We turn around and there's this very, very tall guy in a cowboy hat, looking at all of us quizzically. We explained hurriedly, as politely as possible, that we were in the middle of riding our bikes across country. We thought this was an abandoned bar and asked if we could sleep here. We were all kind of freaked out, and not really because the guy looked mean or anything, but more in the sense of, what the hell were we thinking? We're in the middle of Texas. We're very obviously trespassing. He listens to us and then says only 3 words. "We right here," as he drove away. The 4 of us were obviously concerned, but it wasn't like we could really go anywhere. Pretty easy to find 4 bike tourists inside this deserted Texas town, so we just did what he asked and waited. I didn't really know what to expect. Cowboy hat, the ghost town. Honestly, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But I was trying not to let my mind wander into such a crazy, horrific possibility. Also, kind of thought about the movie Deliverance, which doesn't take place in Texas, but anybody out in the middle of nowhere is going to be scared when they see a hick or hear a banjo. About 10 minutes later, he came back with a much shorter guy and a pit bull. We had a moment of, oh no. But then they introduced themselves, and I cannot for the life of me remember the 2 men's names. But I will never forget that the pit bull was named Shithead. Then they dragged a cooler out of the truck, which was full of beer and steaks. The little guy turned out to be the owner of the bar. He said he invited some of his, and this I quote too, I'll never forget it, roughneck friends by to have a little party. And that's exactly what happened. We all drank free beer, we ate free steaks, we met some roughnecks, and we slept on the floor of this very, very generous man's bar. It went from being very spooky to absolutely rad in the space of 15 very concerning minutes. As the night wore on, we switched from beer to whiskey and really started getting hammered. They joked about how we wouldn't be able to ride our bikes straight the next day, which we all kind of thought was hilarious. They asked why we wanted to do such a thing, which we all had pretty lame answers for. I don't remember everything about what we talked about. I just remember drinking more and more, getting so hot that I was sweating my ass off. By 2 a.m, none of us could even stand anymore. The cowboy hat fella said he needed to legally close anyway. No big deal. Quick sweep up and switch off the lights. My friends and I got comfortable on the floor and just settled in for the night. All those roughnecks shuffled on, outside into the cool night air, saying goodbye as they did. Only the barkeep was left, and he locked the door behind himself as he went out, explaining that he'd be back in the morning. We blacked out like you can't imagine, just dead sleep. I don't remember hearing anybody come back, but I remember waking up in the dark to vibrations in the floor. I thought maybe it was one of my buddies who just gotten up to take a leak, but I squinted and it looked like they were all just lying on the floor next to me. Plus, whoever was walking around had boots on. I could hear them scuffling along the floor. None of us were definitely wearing any shoes of any kind. Hello? I asked out loud. Hey! It was the cowboy guy. The next thing I know, a light hits me in the face. It's blinding. It rolls down my body in the sleeping bag. I start to get up thinking something is wrong, or maybe it's later than what I'm thinking and it's actually morning. The others start squirming around underneath that beam of light, and we all look up to see what the hell's going on. "What the fuck?" Aiden said. "What?" "He's naked, dude. What the hell?" We all turned back and squinted through the light, and sure enough, cowboy guy has got no clothes on, just the hat and boots. Quickly checked my watch, and it had only been like an hour. This guy came back in a drunken stupor, got naked, and for what? None of us knew, and I don't know if we really wanted to know. "Come on, let's have a little fun, boys," he slurred. "Hell no, dude," I hollered out. We scrambled and got our stuff together, blast out the door. Thankfully, the guy was seriously hammered, so he was struggling just to stay upright at this point. We got our bags, our bikes, and all of our stuff and just barreled out into the dark. There was the guy's truck, parked like shit with headlights on, still running with the driver door swinging open. Unbelievable. We slung our stuff over our shoulders and cycled off as quickly and as best as we could, which was not very fast at all. Half our belongings were slipping off of our backs, and we were still drunk to boot. We only made it a mile away before crash landing into a big empty barn outside in this clearing. It was definitely unused, full of rotten hay and old farming equipment. We hid our bikes in the back and climbed up into the rafters. Got the shittiest night rest I've ever had. We all laid in there for 3 hours, drifting off every now and again until the sun came up. Outside, a lone truck drifted up and down those dirt roads. It was that same creep, probably looking to smooth things over, but he had no interest. We properly secured our gear and sailed off for the next town the moment the coast was clear. We definitely tried to keep away from people as much as we could for the rest of that trip. I should have known better than to get swept up in that stealth camping craze. But at the time, it just seemed like the perfect way to add a little bit of adventure to what was otherwise a mundane cross-country road trip. I've been reading about it on forums, hearing stories from YouTubers, how they just disappear into the shadows, blending into urban landscapes for a night without anybody being any the wiser. The appeal was there. No motels, no fees, just me and the thrill of the unknown. It was supposed to be simple. Drive, sleep, drive some more. I planned on visiting a few friends, then heading back home in about 5 days or so. 2 full days of driving one way, and I figured break up the trip with a little bit of stealth camping, make it a little bit more memorable. What's life without a little bit of risk, am I right? I'd done my research, mapped out locations beforehand. Nothing fancy, just spots that look secluded enough to crash for a night. I even prepped a small camping kit with the bare essentials. But as these stories usually go, plans change. And mine took a turn for worse the moment that I rolled up into that small town, much later than I expected to. It was nearly midnight. I was dog-tired from driving all day. The route was straightforward enough until I pulled into the town and realized that the green belt that I've been counting on had been torn up. Excavators and piles of dirt where lush brushes and trees used to be. The city had clearly started some kind of new development project. Cursed under my breath. I'd planned on that spot being a guaranteed win. Easy access, plenty of cover, low chance of getting caught. But now that was out the window. No worries, I told myself. I just gotta stay cool and improvise. I drove around for a little while, scanning the dark streets and parking lots, hunting for a suitable alternative. Soon enough, I spotted what I thought might be a winner. A dry wash running between 2 commercial areas. It was perfect. Dark, overgrown with thick brush, with enough cover to keep me out of sight. The kind of place where you could disappear for a few hours without anybody noticing. I parked the car in a nondescript spot behind this old strip mall. I grabbed my gear, which which was a sleeping bag, a flashlight, and a bit of food. Made my way down to the wash. The deeper I went, the more overgrown and isolated it quickly became. No one in their right mind would come down here at this hour. At least, I thought to myself. It was ideal. About a quarter mile in, I found a dense thicket of bushes. I could barely see the sky through the canopy of branches, but it was secluded enough for me to feel hidden, and that's what I wanted. I set up quickly, using my flashlight to scan the ground for snakes or anything else that might want to share that space with me. All clear. I laid out my sleeping bag, then tucked my book bag next to me, and sat back with a joint. I lit it and took long drags as I listened to the hum of distant traffic, the chirp of the crickets, and the steady drone of nearby AC units. There's something oddly peaceful about it all. Urban camping beneath the stars, surrounded by the muffled sounds of life just beyond reach, quickly started to relax. The weed was doing its job, and before long, I felt myself drifting off. But I didn't sleep very long. I woke up suddenly, heart racing, unsure of what had actually jolted me awake. And then that's when I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Footsteps. Somebody was walking through the wash, coming closer and closer. I tensed up, straining my ears. But it wasn't just one person. It was definitely more than one set of footsteps. I stayed completely still, barely daring to even breathe. From my spot in the brush, I saw a figure emerge, backlit by the faint glow of the distant streetlights. He was a man walking a dog, a big one, and from the look of it, a pit bull straining at its leash. The dog stopped suddenly, its nose working overtime, sniffing at the air. It was pulling hard, dragging its owner straight towards where I was hiding. Panic clawed at my chest. This was it. No way they weren't gonna find me. I curled up tighter, praying that the shadows and bushes would hide me. But I could hear the guy muttering to the dog, yanking at the leash, trying to steer it away. But the dog kept pulling, sniffing the ground frantically, like it was zeroing in on something, or someone. Me. For what felt like forever, I just lay there, muscles locked in terror, a heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. But then, miraculously, the guy manages to wrestle the dog away. "Come on, just leave it," he hollered out, dragging the dog back in the direction that it come from. Slowly, their footsteps faded into the distance, swallowed up by the night. I let out a breath that I didn't even realize I'd been holding. I was trembling, drenched in sweat. I had half a mind to pack up and just get the hell out of there, but I convinced myself it was just a one-off. Just one dude out for a late night stroll. Nothing to worry about. Calm down. My heart eventually settled back into a normal rhythm. The night grew quiet again. The sounds of distant traffic and buzzing crickets lulled me back into a sense of safety. I decided just to stay put. I'd already set everything up. I figured I'd just get a light sleep and leave at first light. But that was a mistake. I started to drift off again when something made me sit up quickly, a sudden feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. I turned and squinted out into the darkness, and that's when I saw him. A man standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows. My blood ran cold. He was staring straight at me, grinning. His face was filthy, hair matted, teeth that looked more like shards of yellow bone than anything else. A few were missing, and one near the front gleamed gold in the dim light. "Nice spot you got here," he rasped, voice like gravel. You know this is mine, right? You fucking prick." I was too shocked to reply at first. My brain was racing, trying to process what I was actually seeing, trying to figure out how the hell this guy just snuck up on me. I didn't mean to take your spot, man. I stammered out, scrambling to grab my things. "I'll go, just let me get my..." "Nah, you ain't gotta go nowhere," he interrupted, taking a step closer. "I just want to talk to you, that's all." There's something in his tone though, and the way he moved. It made my skin crawl. I could feel the danger radiating off of him like heat from a fire. He was too calm, too confident. I don't think I was dealing with some harmless vagrant, dealing with somebody who actually wanted to hurt me, somebody who had hurt people before me. He reached into his pocket and my heart skipped a beat. Slowly, he pulls out a knife, a rusty old linoleum blade. He held it out casually like it was a toy. "You know, it's pretty dangerous out here at night," he said, that twisted grin never leaving his face. "You just never know who you might run into." I didn't wait for him to make a move. Fight or flight kicked in, and I just bolted. I grabbed what I could, my bag, the flashlight, and took off running, tearing through the underbrush as fast as my legs would carry me. Behind me, I could hear him laughing, high-pitched, almost like a childlike giggle. He was chasing me, skipping along like it was some twisted game. He was humming, some kind of eerie off-key tune that sent shivers down my spine. I ran like hell, adrenaline surging, lungs burning as I made for the spot where I'd parked my car. I could hear him closing in, his footsteps light and quick, just behind me. The wash was a maze of shadows and debris. I stumbled more than once, nearly face planting into the gravel, but I kept going, fueled by that sheer terror. When I finally reached the bridge, I risked a glance over my shoulder and he was gone. Just vanished into the darkness like he was never there. I didn't stop to question it. I just dashed up the slope, scrambled back into my car, just floored it out of there without a second thought. It wasn't until I was miles away, with heart still beating, I let myself breathe again. My hands were shaking, my mind racing 1,000 what-ifs. What if he caught me? What if I hadn't woken up in time? What if he was still out there, lurking in the night, waiting for somebody else to stumble into his little stupid game? I remember that crooked edge of that knife and shivered to myself. I've never been so relieved to see the glow of a highway sign in my life. I kept driving until the sun started to rise, till I was far, far away from that cursed place. I did not stop until I reached a crowded truck stop, surrounded by the comforting noise of people, light, and civilization. Stealth camping? No, never again. I'll take a cheap motel over that death trap in the dark any day. Whatever thrill I thought I'd find out there wasn't worth the horror that I narrowly escaped. And to this day, whenever I hear the faint hum of a distant tune, it brings me right back to that night. The man with a knife and that awful grin, waiting in the shadows. Nico and I had been stealth camping since our college days, back when adventure was more affordable than a motel room and a lot more exciting. We'd honed our skills over the years, perfecting the art of disappearing into the fringes of the parks, greenbelts, forgotten lots. It became our thing, a way to travel light, save cash, and have a story to tell. And if I'm honest, the creepiest thing we'd ever run into was just an overly curious raccoon trying to paw its way into our food stash. We'd pride ourselves on being smart, cautious, and above all, invisible. But there was one night, one time that still gives me chills to think about to this day. We were doing a road trip through the Pacific Northwest, a route that we planned out to hit as many national parks and forests as we could. The days were spent hiking trails, lounging by the lakes, soaking up the beauty of it all. By night, we'd find someplace quiet, somewhere tucked away, and make camp. That night was no different than any other. We pulled into a small town that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Just rows of aging storefronts, a single gas station, and old houses that leaned with the weight of time. It was late summer, warm and dry, with the sky clear enough to see some stars too. Nico suggested we check out a public park on the edge of town. From the road, it looked pretty perfect. Lots of trees, a creek running through it, and best of all, nobody else around. We parked in a gravel lot near the entrance, grabbed our hammocks, and made our way down this narrow trail that hugged the creek. It led us into a small clearing surrounded by towering firs. The branches were thick enough to block out most of the light, turning everything into shades of deep blue and black. There was really only one sign of civilization back there, a crooked wooden fence, half rotten and overgrown with vines, barely even visible through the trees. It looked like it marked the edge of somebody's property, but there weren't any lights and we definitely didn't see a house. Maybe it was just abandoned. Whatever it was far away enough that we didn't really worry about it. We found a spot a little ways off the trail, strung up our hammocks, and settled in for a quiet night underneath the stars. We had a quick, cold dinner, some sandwiches and fruit, then laid back in the bigger hammock together, watching the sky through the gaps in the branches. The only sounds around us was the gentle bubble of the creek, rustling of the leaves in the breeze, the occasional hoot of an owl. It was peaceful. We'd done this so many times, I didn't even think twice about it. Stealth camping was second nature by now. We must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was blinking awake in the dark. My first thought was maybe I just heard something subtle but out of place. I stayed still and listened, but all I could make out was the usual night sounds. I was about to shrug it off when I felt Nico stir beside me. "Hey, you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, even though I hadn't heard anything specific yet. His voice was low and tense, the kind of whisper that puts your nerves on edge. "What is it?" I asked, barely even daring to breathe. "Been hearing footsteps for a while now." That woke me up fast. I strained my ears and caught it. A faint shuffling sound, almost like somebody dragging their feet. It was slow and deliberate, definitely not an animal. My heart started to thump in my chest as I scanned the darkness around us. The trees cast long shadows that seemed to shift with every gust of wind. Then, in the pale light filtering through the branches, I saw movement, a figure, hunched, stumbling between the trees. It was an old woman. Her hair was wild and matted, her clothes hanging like loose rags. She moved erratically, lurching forward a few steps, then doubling back, her arms hanging limp at her sides. For a moment, I thought she was lost or confused. Maybe she'd wandered off from somewhere nearby. But there was just something about the way she moved, something jerky and unnatural, almost like she was being pulled along by invisible strings. We didn't dare make a sound, we just lay there, watching as she staggered closer, her face barely visible in the dim light. I held my breath, hoping she'd pass by and just leave us alone. But she didn't. Instead, she stopped near one of the larger trees, glanced around nervously, then crouched down like she was trying to hide. She pressed herself against the trunk and went completely still. We lost sight of her. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what we were just seeing. Who was she? Why was she out here in the middle of the night, acting like that? And more importantly, where was she now? I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, just out of sight, watching us. Minutes dragged by. I could feel the tension building in the air, thick enough to choke on. Nico's grip on my arm tightened. I could tell he was just as freaked out as I was, but neither of us wanted to make a move until we knew she was gone. Then out of nowhere, there was more movement, this time louder, heavier. Two men appeared, striding out of the park and into the trees like they knew exactly where they were going. They were dressed in this dark, rough-looking clothes, and the way they walked was with purpose and intent. Made my stomach knot up with dread. They weren't out here for a casual stroll. They were looking for something, or someone. Nico and I huddled up together, barely daring to peek over the edge of the hammock as they got closer and closer. They stopped near the tree where the old woman had hidden. I heard them muttering to one another, low and urgently, like they were arguing back and forth. One of them raised a hand and motioned toward the tree. Then, without warning, they started beating at the underbrush, kicking at the bushes, all the while whispering harshly to one another. I clapped a hand over my mouth, terrified they'd hear my breathing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of them barked something, and the old woman crawled out from her hiding spot. She looked even more pitiful up close. Her body was trembling as she pulled herself to her feet. One of the men reached down and yanked her up by the arm. She wobbled, barely even able to stand. They didn't seem to care. They patted her off and dusted dirt from her clothes. One of them slapped her across the head, hard enough to make her stumble. She didn't even cry out, just flinched and then kept her head down. "Keep in sight this time," one of them snapped. His voice was gruff, with an edge of cruelty that just made my blood run cold. They marched her back the way they'd came, forcing her to stay between them as they headed towards the park. But before they left, they paused and scanned the area, their eyes sweeping over the trees, the bushes, us. I felt their gaze like a knife, even from that distance, searching for something or making sure nobody was watching. When their eyes finally settled on our hammock, I thought my heart would stop completely. They stared at it, whispering to one another again. And for a terrifying moment, I thought they were going to come over and check it out. After a tense exchange, they shrugged it off and kept moving, leading that woman away, back into the shadows. We stayed frozen, barely even daring to breathe until we were sure that they were gone. My mind was racing with 100 different questions, none of which had any good answers to. Who were those guys? What were they doing with that woman? Why the hell were they out here in the middle of the night dragging her around like that? The second that they were out of sight, Nico and I scrambled to break down our camp. Both our hands shaking as we grabbed our gear, packing it up as quickly as we could. Neither of us spoke, didn't even dare to turn on the light. The whole time I kept expecting them to come back, to find us, and do God knows what. My chest was tight with fear, my breath shallow and ragged. I'd never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. We bolted back to the trail, and the night now feeling far more menacing than peaceful. When we got back to our car, Nico fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before finally getting the door unlocked. We jumped in and locked the doors, and sped out of there like the devil himself was on our tail. It wasn't until we were halfway down the highway we even dared to talk about what had just happened. We agreed we needed to report it. I don't know what I expected when I called the local police, but the response was lukewarm at best. The dispatcher took down our information, said that they'd send somebody out to check it out, but that was it. No follow-up, no questions. I got the distinct feeling they weren't surprised by what we just described, like it was just another mess-up incident of a long list of things they'd already seen. We didn't stick around to find out though. We drove until we hit the next town and found a cheap motel. That night, we lie awake, replaying those events in our heads, trying to make sense of it all. But the more we thought about it, the more unsettling it became. The old woman's hollow eyes, the way she moved like a puppet on loose strings, the cruelty of those two men. It was a nightmare made real, one that we could barely even process. It wasn't really just the strangeness of the situation that haunted us, but the implication. What if we hadn't stayed silent? What if we tried to intervene, or even just made our presence known? Those guys clearly weren't out there to help her. They were controlling her somehow. Who knows what they were planning or how many others they'd helped before. The thought of getting caught in their sights made my skin crawl. The next morning, with the sun bright blazing, as if nothing was wrong in the world, but the fear still clung to us. We were quieter than usual as we packed up our things to hit the road. The radio played softly in the background, but it did nothing to cut through the oppressive tension hanging over us. It was Nico who finally broke the silence. "You think that was some kind of trafficking thing?" His voice was low, like he really didn't want to hear the answer to that question. I shrugged, even though I wasn't sure he was looking at me. "Maybe, or something worse. I just can't get her face out of my head." "Yeah," he paused, fingers tapping the steering wheel. "But you want to know what bugs me even more than that?" I turned to him, curious despite the dread gnawing at my gut. "What?" He just kept his eyes on the road, but I could see the tension in his jaw. They looked at us. They knew we were there, but they just left. It's like, I don't know, they didn't care. That sent a fresh chill down my spine. He was right. They definitely spotted our hammock, made eye contact with us in the dark, and then just walked away. It was like they knew we wouldn't say anything, or we wouldn't be a problem. Or maybe they were just confident that even if we did, nothing would even come from it. Either way, it made me feel small, insignificant, like we'd gotten a glimpse into something much more bigger and sinister than we could even understand. We didn't stop stealth camping after that. Like I said, it's our thing. It's the majority of the time, but it's still the best way to sleep underneath the stars, far from prying eyes and overpriced campsites. But I will admit that night changed something for us. We're a lot more cautious now, more deliberate about where we camp and what we look for in a site, and how long we stay. Nico and I kind of have this unspoken rule now. If either of us feels in the slightest unease about a spot, we just leave. No second guessing, no gut checks. We trust each other's instincts implicitly because we've seen firsthand how wrong things can go, even in a place that seems safe. I still think about that night sometimes, usually when we're lying in our hammocks, staring up at the stars, listening to the rustle of the wind in the trees. I wonder if that old woman ever got away, or if she's still out there, trapped in whatever dark world those men were a part of. I wonder if anybody else has seen what we saw, or if they got too close and didn't make it out. In the end, I'm sorry there's no real closure to our story. No comforting answer or neatly wrapped up conclusion. Just a lingering sense of unease. A reminder that even in the quietest, most peaceful places, there can always be something sinister lurking just beyond the shadows. And that's the thing about stealth camping. It's all about staying hidden, slipping underneath the radar. But sometimes, when you least expect it, you find out that you're not the only one out there hiding. And sometimes, you're the one that gets found.